गुड मॉर्निंग मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। हाँ, आज हम डिस्कस करेंगे राइजोपस का लास्ट लास्ट टॉपिक है ना, लास्ट बट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक, राइजोपस लाइफ साइकिल। ठीक है बच्चों, एग्जाम में प्रश्न कुछ इस तरह से आ सकता है, गिव ग्राफिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ लाइफ साइकिल ऑफ राइजोपस, और राइजोपस की जगह पूछ सकते हैं ग्राफिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ लाइफ साइकिल ऑफ अ फंगस कॉल्ड ब्लैक माउल्ड और ब्रेड माउल्ड। इसी तरह से आ सकता है या तो गिव डायग्रामेटिक और पिक्टोरियल रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ लाइफ साइकिल, या फिर इस तरह से आ सकता है डिस्क्राइब लाइफ साइकिल ऑफ राइजोपस इन डिटेल, और डिस्क्राइब लाइफ साइकिल ऑफ अ फंगस which is known as black mold or bread mold in detail। ठीक है बच्चों, और हमको मालूम है लाइफ साइकिल इज कंस्टिट्यूटेड in two different ways, either it is an asexual life cycle or a sexual life cycle। Okay, first of all we will deal with a graphic representation of life cycle। और इसमें दोनों फेजेस दिए हैं बच्चों, ठीक है, अब कंबाइन ही कर रहा हूं मैं अब मैं एसेक्सुअल फेज एज वेल एज सेक्सुअल फेज। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी विल टेक asexual life cycle। What happens, we know that when the thallus of Rhizopus is growing vegetatively, it consists of only two types of hyphae. One is prostatally growing stoloniferous hyphae, and another one is uh, the short branched rhizoidal hyphae, which grow toward the lower side, helps in anchoring the thallus to substratum with substratum, and also helps in uptake of nutrition. So when the times come for this fungus to reproduce asexually, the stoloniferous hyphae starts producing a special hypha, a special hyphae in a cluster, which are known as sporangiophores. And the sporangiophores arise from stoloniferous hyphae towards upper side, just opposite to the rhizoidal hyphae, and produce a sac-like structure at a tip, which is known as sporangium। ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, and we know that while a sac-like structure is formed, it gets differentiated into two regions, or the cytoplasm of that sac-like structure gets differentiated into two regions. One is upper hemispherical or upper peripheral periplasm region, or we can call it ooplasm or spore plasm, sorry, not ooplasm, spore plasm, whereas lower region remains in the form of a vacuolated cytoplasm or columella cytoplasm। ठीक है, and a columella is formed that separates upper peripheral cytoplasm from rest of the thallus, and the cytoplasm of upper hemispherical region produces spores. And how spores are formed, that the cytoplasm breaks into many pieces, each piece enclosing many nuclei। ये याद रखना है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, many nuclei synthesize their own plasma cell membrane and cell wall and get differentiated into in the form of minute non-motile non-flagellated multinucleated structures called sporangiosspores, and these sporangiospores are released from sporangium by breakdown of sporangial wall, which results by increase in size of a columella that exerts pressure on sporangial wall. As a result, sporangial wall breaks open and sporangiospores are released, and those sporangiospores then germinate to produce a new vegetative thallus of Rhizopus। ठीक है बच्चों, so this is it about asexual reproduction। As we know that the thallus is heterothallic in most of the species of Rhizopus. That means the thalli are unisexual, equivalent to unisexual. But sexuality, although here it is not defined, so we can say that there are separate plus 10 mycelia and separate minus 10 mycelia. Now we come to the sexual life cycle. What happens? We know that बच्चों, in the year 1973, a new finding, there was a new finding done by Goodday. And what was that new finding? That he saw that a chemical substance called a trisporic acid. In fact, two types trisporic acid A and B, they induce the formation of they induce the formation of a special hypha called a sexual hypha, which we known as which we call a zygophore. So trisporic acids, they induce the formation of zygophores, plus 10 zygophores and minus 10 zygophores, and also the chemicals are responsible for bringing together these two opposite strain zygophores or the compatible zygophores, which come close to each other, and they produce male plus 10 gametangium and minus 10 gametangium, which are the sexual structures in Rhizopus. And these gametangia, they produce gametes which are in fact aplanogametes. Aplanogametes, the plus 10 gametangium produces plus 10 gamete, whereas minus 10 gametangium produces minus 10 gamete. Okay? Then fertilization occurs, and fertilization occurs by gametangial conjugation, in which the fusing gametangia, they lose their original structure. Such type of sexual behavior is said to be copulation or conjugation, or gametangial copulation or gametangial conjugation. Because of this reason, Rhizopus is said to be a conjugating fungus. So after conjugation, we get a fusion cell. Fusion cell, some of the authors, they have cited it as a young zygospore. And that young zygospore or fusion cell synthesizes a thick cell wall which consists of two layers: inner wall layer, which is thin, smooth, flexible, called intine, and outer wall layer is called exine, which is very thick, rough and tough, and bears many ornamentations or in the form of spiny structures. Or we can say that exine is a highly sculptured. And because this fusion cell, okay, now this fusion cell becomes a zygospore after synthesis of its wall. And because we know that zygospore stores a good quantity of food, and also it has a thick wall, especially the outer wall called exine, so it may behave as a resting spore. So after breakdown of parent thallus, it perinates on substratum, and on approach of favorable conditions, it germinates to produce a new vegetative thallus. So during resting stage, what we see inside zygospore, that it contains many pairs of plus 10 and minus 10 nuclei. Why, bachcho? Because in Rhizopus, karyogamy is delayed to a great extent. Okay? And karyogamy occurs just before germination. So, when the favorable time approaches, what happens? That all the pairs of nuclei degenerate except one, which then undergo karyogamy, means these nuclei fuse. Thus, the zygospore becomes a diploid. Okay? And soon meiosis occurs. As a result, now the zygospore becomes a structure having 4 haploid nuclei, out of which 2 are from plus strain and 2 are from minus strain. Now, next event, what happens, bachcho? Before germination, these all events are taking place before germination. Okay? All the nuclei, the 3 nuclei degenerate, leaving behind only one nucleus, and that surviving nucleus can either be of plus strain or a minus strain. ठीक है? Thus, at this stage, zygospore remains with only one haploid nucleus and it germinates now. And it germinates by giving out a germ tube in the form of a tubular extension of a inner wall layer, which is intine, and produces a sac-like structure at tip, which is known as zygosporangium. And zygosporangium then produces some non-motile structures called meiospores. Why these are called meiospores, bacho? These spores are called meiospores because they are formed by meiosis in zygote. And zygote here is our zygospore. Okay? And then these meiospores germinate to give rise to new vegetative thallus. Okay, bachcho? So this was it about a graphical representation of life cycle. Now we move to the pictorial representation or the diagrammatic representation of life cycle of Rhizopus. Again, we will start firstly asexual part. This is the asexual life cycle and this is the sexual life cycle. मेरे ख्याल में मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, मैंने इवेंट्स को डिटेल में डिस्कस कर लिया है. अब मैं इस इमेज को बहुत ज्यादा डिस्क्राइब नहीं करूंगा. ठीक है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों. ड्यूरिंग asexual reproduction, what happens, bachcho? These are those cluster of upright unbranched structures called sporangiophores, and these are the special hyphae which we call as asexual branches or asexual hyphae, and they produce a sac-like structure at the tip which is known as sporangium. ठीक है बच्चों. फिर आगे के इवेंट्स हमको मालूम है. इसका स्पोरेंजियम का जो यंग स्पोरेंजियम का साइटोप्लाज्म दो हिस्सों में डिवाइड हो जाता है. वो क्यों होता है बच्चों? क्योंकि बहुत सारे न्यूक्लियाई अलोंग विद फूड दे मूव टू अपर पोर्शन. एज अ रिजल्ट अपर पोर्शन बिकम्स dense which is called spore plasm. ठीक है. And lower portion which contains very less number of nuclei, few nuclei or no nuclei, but it contains many vacuoles, safe vacuoles, because we know that in Rhizopus there are many numerous minute safe vacuoles in cytoplasm. So those vacuoles accumulate here and lower portion becomes vacuolated cytoplasm or uh, columella cytoplasm. Then what happens? The vacuoles arrange themselves between these two zones of cytoplasm and fuse up laterally to form a continuous cleft, which becomes a septum. It synthesizes its own cell wall so that the terminal portion becomes a real or actual sporangium and lower portion becomes columella, which remains in direct continuity with the rest of the thallus. And by the formation of the septum, the upper portion, which is our true sporangium or real sporangium, it gets delimited from the rest of the thallus. And finally, cytoplasm is divided. Cytoplasm of sporangium is divided into many pieces. Each piece encloses a large number of nuclei. ठीक है. Or multiple, we can say multiple nuclei synthesize their own plasma membrane and then cell wall, and the resultant structures become our non-flagellated minute multinucleated structures called sporangiospores, And because these are non-motile or non-flagellated, they can be said to be aplanospores. Then what happens? Cytoplasm keeps on rushing. Once the spores are formed, cytoplasm keeps on rushing towards tip. As a result, it exerts pressure on a columella. The size of columella increases, and that increase in size of columella exerts pressure on a sporangium. As a result, sporangial wall breaks open into irregular pieces and spores are liberated. And these spores now, which are our aplanospores. So don't get confused. ठीक है बच्चों, आप लोग बोलोगे सर कभी आप स्पोरेंजियोस्पोर्स बोल रहे हो, कभी आप एप्लेनोस्पोर्स बोल रहे हो। तो स्पोरेंजियोस्पोर्स बिल्कुल है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। क्यों? क्योंकि ये स्पोरेंजियम के अंदर बन रहे हैं। और ये एप्लेनोस्पोर्स भी है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों। क्यों? क्योंकि इनके पास फ्लैजेला नहीं है, ये नॉन मोटाइल है। देन the spores germinate by giving out a germ tube, and again the germ tube is nothing but a tubular extension of inner wall layer which is our intine. ठीक है बच्चों? And it makes a new thallus or new vegetative thallus of rhizopus. With this, asexual portion completes. Now we move to the sexual portion. ठीक है बच्चों? A chemical called trisporic acid induces formation of special branches which are now our sexual branches. ठीक है? And these are called zygophores. What happens? Trisporic acid induces coming together of the two compatible zygophores also. As a result, they come in contact with each other. The point where they come in contact with each other, a lateral small protuberance is formed on both. ठीक है? That protuberance enlarges because of flow of material along with many nuclei, and that resultant enlarged structures are called progamitengia. One is plus strain progamitengium and one is minus strain progamitengium. Then what happens? The terminal portion of the progamitengium gets delimited by the formation of septum, so that the terminal portion of each progamitengium enclosing large number of nuclei get differentiated into gamitengium, either a plus strain gamitengium or a minus strain gamitengium, whereas the rest of the portion which remains in continuity with the rest of the thallus, it is called a suspensor. ठीक है बच्चों? Then fertilization occurs, and fertilization occurs by gamitengial conjugation or gamitengial copulation. What does it mean? That the gamitengia themselves fuse completely so that they lose their original identity or original structure. So this is it, that a freshly formed structure or a cell which can be said to be a young zygophore, or it can be said to be a fusion cell. Fusion cell. Now this fusion cell encloses a large number of nuclei pairs. Why बच्चों? Because during gamitengial conjugation, karyogamy does not occur. Cytogamy does occur. साइटोगेमी हो जाता है। ठीक है? साइटोप्लाज्म फ्यूज हो जाते हैं, लेकिन न्यूक्लियाई फ्यूज नहीं हो पाते हैं। इस वजह से न्यूक्लियाई पेयर्स में रहते हैं। पेयर और कंपेटिबल पेयर्स। कंपेटिबल पेयर्स मींस प्लस स्ट्रेन nucleus makes pair with minus strain nucleus always. It is never like a plus and plus strain nuclei का pair और minus and minus strain nuclei का pair, ऐसा नहीं होता है। So कोई एक अनलकी न्यूक्लियस रह जाता है either from plus strain और minus strain, जिसको हम बोलेंगे unpaired nucleus that degenerates। ठीक है बच्चों? And immediately, in fact, immediately after a pairing up of nuclei, A new wall is synthesized. न्यू वॉल इज सिंथेसाइज। अब यहां ध्यान देना है मेरे प्यारे बच्चों, दैट वॉल इज सिंथेसाइज्ड विद इन द वॉल ऑफ फ्यूजन सेल बच्चों। ठीक है, विद इन द वॉल ऑफ फ्यूजन सेल। ठीक है, एंड वॉल इज टू लेयर्ड, इनर wall layer is called intine and outer layer is called exine, and exine is a rough, tough, thick, non-smooth, not smooth, highly accumulated or highly sculptured. ठीक है, and thus it behaves as a resting spore. It can pass over unfavorable periods. After breakdown of a parent body, zygospore is released into substratum and there it perinates. And at this stage, zygospore is not diploid बच्चों। ठीक है, it is not diploid, rather it contains a large number of paired nuclei. And when the favorable time approaches, it germinates. और जर्मिनेशन के दौरान क्या क्या होता है इवेंट्स, वो सारे यहां पर बताना पॉसिबल नहीं था बच्चों। ठीक है, ठीक है, तो आप लोग भी अगर चाहो तो जब डिस्क्राइब करना है बच्चों, जब लेंथी क्वेश्चन आएगा उस समय में आपको डिस्क्राइब करना पड़ेगा। अगर डायग्रामेटिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन आया तब आप सीधे ही इस इवेंट से इस इवेंट तक तो जंप कर सकते हो बच्चों। ठीक है, तो मैं तो अध्यापक हूं, मुझे तो बताना पड़ेगा। मैं एक बार फिर से रिपीट करता हूं, बिफोर जर्मिनेशन व्हाट हैपेंस बच्चों, these all events will be taking place in this structure। ठीक है, what happens that all the pairs degenerate except one, so the zygospore or the sorry this zygospore। मेरा जीव कई बार पता क्या होता है बच्चों, कंटिन्यूटी में जब टीचर अपना मस्त होके पढ़ा रहा होता है कई बार जीव फिसल जाता है बच्चों। ठीक है, उसको नेगेटिव तौर पर नहीं लेना है ना, लेकिन मैं सॉरी फिर बोल देता हूं, सॉरी, गलती तो गलती है। At that stage, zygospore becomes a dikaryotic structure, a dikaryotic and heterokaryotic structure. Dikaryotic because it contains two nuclei, and these two nuclei are from opposite sexes generally, but here these are from opposite strains. ठीक है, thus it is said to be heterokaryotic. Then what happens? Karyogamy occurs. As a result, a short-lived zygospore is formed. डिप्लॉइड जाइगोस्पोर इज फॉर्म्ड। ठीक है, क्योंकि डिप्लॉइड कंडीशन बहुत कम समय के लिए रहता है बच्चों। ठीक है, इमीडिएटली आफ्टर कारियोगेमी व्हाट हैपेंस, meiosis occurs. As a result, now zygospore becomes a spore containing 4 haploid nuclei, and out of those 4 haploid nuclei 3 nuclei degenerate, leaving behind only one nucleus, and that nucleus can either be of plus strain or minus strain। ठीक है, देन व्हाट हैपेंस, शायद ग्राफिकल रिप्रेजेंटेशन में मैं कहीं मिस कर गया था शायद। एट दैट कंडीशन जाइगोस्पोर consists of a single nucleus and that nucleus is a haploid। So after that mitosis occurs in that zygospore। ठीक है, mitosis occurs, as a result zygospore becomes a multinucleated and then it germinates। and how it germinates, that at a point exine ruptures, exine degenerates, exine disintegrates, and intine comes out in the form of a germ tube, and it produces a sac like structure terminally or a tip which is called zygosporangium, and zygosporangium produces spores which are called meiospores in the same fashion as is formed during asexual reproduction। Only difference is that the meiospores formed, they enclose one nucleus, whereas the sporangiospores formed during asexual reproduction, they enclose many nuclei। So these structures are multinucleate, whereas meiospores are uninucleate। And then these meiospores germinate to produce a new vegetative thallus of rhizopus. So with this, our today's topic finishes. So see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we will start a new genus which is member of a third subdivision of a division Eumycota, and that is Ascomycotina, subdivision Ascomycotina, and we will deal with the penicillium tomorrow. Tomorrow we will deal with the morphology of a penicillium. So see you tomorrow, मेरे प्यारे बच्चों. Have a nice time, have a nice day, stay safe, God bless you.